And so today we'll look at certain functions that are essential to the miracle worker. And we'll explore that in great detail. Hello and welcome to Miracles on High Plains. My name is Jonica, and our reader today is David S.
Before miracle workers are ready to undertake their function in this world, it is essential that they fully understand the fear of release. Otherwise, they may unwittingly foster the belief that release is imprisonment, a belief that is already very prevalent. This misperception arises in turn from the belief that harm can be limited to the body. That is because of the underlying fear that the mind can hurt itself. None of these errors is meaningful because the miscreations of the mind do not really exist. This recognition is a far better protective device than any form of level confusion because it introduces correction at the level of the error. It is essential to remember that only the mind can create and that correction belongs at the thought level.
Mhm. So, as always, it's helpful to unpack some of these ideas so that we have understanding of what it all means. And this early statement says it is essential that a miracle worker first fully understand the fear of release. This will appear again and again, the fear of the release. This is to say, the ego is afraid of being released from its illusions. The ego would prefer to remain chained and bound by its own view of the world. And so when a teaching system like A Course in Miracles comes along, your ego at first will react to it as a strange idea inviting you in out of the ego's world and into the real world. And that will be that invitation to be released from the ego's world will initially react with fear. And so it's essential to recognize that rather than to bury that fear or to resist against the fear. It's essential that you recognize it and just say, oh, there's a fear reaction I'm having to the invitation of the Holy Spirit. Let me not try to fight this myself. Let me hand this over to the Holy Spirit and let her bring healing. So all those reactions are errors of the mind. In and of themselves, they are not meaningful. They are illusions. They don't really exist. It's more helpful to, well, excuse me, it's more helpful to recognize that they don't exist. It's that recognition is a far better protective device than trying to be confused, than being confused by the levels. Why? Because it introduces correction at the level of the error, which is in the mind. The mind is always the one that makes the mistake. That's the creative level. That's the level in which we can sometimes miscreate when we're misguided. So it's more helpful to remember that illusions are not real. They are not, that is to say, They are transients. This is a term I learned in engineering. A transient is in any phenomena something that spikes temporarily and then goes away. All the events of time have that characteristic in that they spike, they appear in some form, and then they fade away. And so they don't really exist. They're not permanent. They're not a part of reality. And so terms that we want to remember here is the fear of release, to recognize that the ego will always react defensively to any proposal to let the Holy Spirit lead and be our guide. And so, how do you apply this? Is that when it occurs, you might experience these things when you practice the workbook lessons, when the Holy Spirit is beckoning you to rise up to your higher self. And at the same time, your old self, your little self, the ego, will respond with reluctance to that. That's the fear of release. It's essential that you fully recognize the fear of the release. What's it essential for? It's essential so that later on, when these things occur in your own reactions to situations, you won't grab on to those fears as if they belong to your true self, but will instead recognize them as part of the false self. Let's go on.
It is essential to remember that only the mind can create, and that correction belongs at the thought level. To amplify an earlier statement, spirit is already perfect and therefore does not require correction. The body does not exist except as a learning device for the mind. This learning device is not subject to errors of its own because it cannot create. It is obvious then that inducing the mind to give up its miscreations is the only application of creative ability that is truly meaningful.
So just a moment ago, we were talking about level confusion. And here are the three primary levels: spirit, the body, and the mind. Of those, the area that this course is directed to is the mind. Why? Because when the mind is confused, it will use its power to miscreate. And that is the fundamental error, is misusing the power of your mind, independent of God's will, God's plan, the value structure that the Creator set in motion to use our mind independent of all that. And so inducing your mind to give up the miscreations is really meaningful. That this changes everything for you and for all the people in your world, to give up miscreations. In fact, the Course several times says that this is what it's really about. If your mind always uses its power in accord with God's will, then it properly creates. That's a healed mind. All errors, all misdirection goes away, miscreations go away. And so here's the question: how can we induce your mind to give up its miscreations. For what we've just said is spirit doesn't need to change, it's already perfect. And the body doesn't make errors on its own. The body is merely following guidance by the mind. So the only zone that needs correcting is the mind itself, but we must induce the mind to give up its powers to miscreate. Now, I don't know if that's answered in the next paragraph, but I will say we found the answer to this question: how do we induce the mind to stop miscreating? We read about it in a previous session, and that is that your will power must make a choice. And the choice is, what do you want to do with the power of your mind? It's a choice. And when your willpower, when you become clear about your purpose, about what you are and why you're here, that is an act of will. And then your willpower pulls the mind into accord with that purpose and plan. It induces the mind to let go of its illusions, to take back its projections, to recognize that only the truth is true, and move it in the proper direction towards spirit. David, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Jonica. I really appreciate your advice on those 3 steps that you outlined a couple of weeks ago. Heather and I talked about that and reduced it to a very simple affirmation. I say to myself that I have found effective because it helps me counteract that. And the affirmation is, I am one, I have everything, my needs are met. And it's just 10 words, but if I keep repeating it, it really shifts for me. And it really has helped me make that recognition step. Thank you.
Oh, very good, David. In fact, what I want to use that as a learning device for everybody. What David did is he used his own words. He used his own voice to affirm the message that we're receiving from the Holy Spirit. This is called adding your voice to the voice of the Holy Spirit. You can change the words. And matter of fact, it's a good idea if you do. In the workbook lessons, they encourage you in the first 50 lessons to add your own words, to make it your own, so that you're not merely parroting words that were given to you, but you're co-creating with those ideas, making them your own. And that's a creative process. Now, as David's example, you don't want to change the direction of the message, but it certainly is permitted to change the form in which it's expressed. Okay, so we're going to induce the mind to give up its miscreations. Let's go on.
Magic is the mindless or the miscreative use of mind. Physical medications are forms of spells, but if you are afraid to use the mind to heal, you should not attempt to do so. The very fact that you are afraid makes your mind vulnerable to miscreation. You are therefore likely to misunderstand any healing that might occur. And because egocentricity and fear usually occur together, you may be unable to accept the real source of the healing. Under these conditions, it is safer for you to rely temporarily on physical healing devices because you cannot perceive them as your own creations. As long as your sense of vulnerability persists, you should not attempt to perform miracles.
So the topic, title for today is the function of the miracle worker. This could be viewed as a set of instructions, guidance for those who choose the path of being miracle workers. And there are certain background information that is needed. And one of them is that you should not attempt to perform a miracle as long as you're in a sense of vulnerability, a sense of fear, a sense of uncertainty and doubt. That is not the frame of mind in which one performs miracles. And so I'll remind you, principle number 7, while everyone is entitled to miracles, purification of the mind is first. We need to get rid of the fear, the doubts, the judgments, the guilt, the uncertainty first. Clear the mind of all those miscreations which we thought were real. Clear the mind of all that. And then what comes in is it gets replaced by a sense of inner guidance, inner confidence, inner assurity, which replaces the former sense of vulnerability. The very fact that you are afraid makes your mind vulnerable to miscreations. And so this can be viewed on a spectrum of fear and doubt on the low end of the spectrum. And on the high end of the spectrum, a sense of peace, love, safety, trust, and invulnerability. And this program is intended to help guide your mind from that lower end of fear and doubt through to a set of changing beliefs and faith and initial trust and many levels of trust along the way, until eventually all the sense of inadequacies and littleness fall away. The mind stops miscreating and becomes truly truly free. Truly free. Until then, you're likely to misunderstand healing, and egocentricity and fear come rushing in. And if your mind is unable to distinguish the source of fear and egocentricity, you'll be unable to recognize that and deny those illusions. And this will prevent you from turning in the proper direction to the real source of healing. Got a couple hands. David, I don't know if your hand was up from before. I'm going to assume that was the case. Feel free to raise it if you want. Susie?
Yeah, I remember how crucial like cause and effect was for me. Like I used to, until I really understood that my mind and my thoughts were the cause, and then the effects was fear and anxiety and like, because I used to say, no, these things happen to me. This is why my mind is like this. And it took me it took me a long time to understand there's really nothing outside of my own mind and thoughts. And that really was freedom. And I love that this says until you understand that and until you're ready or, whatever, it's okay. It's okay. You know, take the medications, do the whatever until you're ready, you know, because I couldn't accept the real source of my healing until I truly had like a bunch of aha moments. Oh, it's only the way I think. I've given all the meaning that this has, I've given it. So it's fascinating to go back. I love it and read all this and, you know, understand it and say to people that don't, oh, it's okay, you will. Like, just keep going. Yeah, that's it.
It's really true. Thank you. Susie really illustrated in her sharing there the phrase that I use often. I'm taking back my miscreations. I used to project them out and believe that that was the world, but now I have an understanding and I take all that back and I own it as that's coming from me, not from the world. And a little footnote in partnerships and intimate relationships, it is when there's confusion, often is the case is you project your own inner demons outward to the person nearest to you, most available to you. And in therapy and all types of therapy, we learn to take ownership for those projections, to take it back and work on ourselves. And so this is one of the signs of a mind that's healing, is it's no longer preoccupied with fears coming from external sources, but it recognizes the source of those fears. And I submit that if you are open to that belief that the sources emerge from within, and you pay attention to your feelings, you can very quickly discover that they're obviously emerging from within you. An example of this is you could be sitting on a beach by yourself, and all these thoughts and feelings emerge from your past, the feelings of resentment and guilt and judgment, and you might link them to someone else. Well, who caused, you're sitting on a beach by yourself. Who is the cause of that fear and resentment? The other person, or is it coming from within, from the miscreative uses of your own mind? Let's go on.
Hey, Jonica, I just want to make one comment, if I can,
please,
about the fantastic, I'm going to call it a quote, Freudian slip that you made when you wanted to say free, but you said fear, and how that is the ultimate level confusion, and that we confuse the source of free with fear. And you know, Freud spent so much time working on the ego and the super ego and the subconscious and those levels and trying to figure them out. And this course just takes us right through all of that to go from fear to free, which I just think was a classic. It was great. Thank you. It really
that is classic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's right in.
All right. Magic is the mindless. Where were you going?
We're on to a new page here.
Oh, we are. Okay.
Yeah.
I have already said that miracles are expressions of miracle mindedness, and miracle mindedness means right mindedness. The right minded neither exalt nor depreciate the mind of the miracle worker or the miracle receiver. However, as a correction, the miracle need not await the right-mindedness of the receiver. In fact, its purpose is to restore him to his right mind. It is essential, however, that the miracle worker be in his right mind, however briefly, or he will be unable to reestablish right-mindedness in someone else.
This paragraph is so essential. I strongly recommend that you review it and basically that you memorize the principles here, for they are that fundamental. So two terms that we'll use interchangeably: to be miracle-minded means to be right-minded. And that's the author's choice of terminology, to be in your right mind. You can only perform miracles when you're in your right mind. When you're in your wrong mind or your confused mind, you cannot perform miracles. And so, why is this essential? Because our function as a miracle worker is to stay in that state of consciousness where we're connected to spirit, where we're listening and we're guided. This is being in our right mind. For only in that state can we be in a position to hear and receive instructions as to how to be helpful to another person. And the terms here are very helpful, because we said before that a miracle occurs as an exchange between two individuals. So there is a giver and a receiver. And it's, as it says here, the receiver of the miracle is not necessary that they be in their right mind. In fact, the reason why they need a miracle is because they're not in their right mind. But it is essential that one of the two individuals be in their right mind. We'll call that the miracle worker. And it doesn't mean that they have to be a master of right-mindedness, meaning they're at it constantly, but it does mean that they have to be in their right mind at that moment. Otherwise, if they're unconscious and miscreating, they're not going to be able to be of any help to anyone else. And so these principles really define the groundwork needed to be helpful, truly helpful in a lasting way to anyone. Susie?
Yeah, this is great. And I think it's a little tricky because, you know, I'll just use me and David because why not? So, you know, if we're having a little fight or issue or whatever, our egos are colliding. And, you know, one of us wants to pretend we're in our right mind, but we're really not. You know, nothing changes, you know, like, but on the other hand, if truly someone really is in their higher self, it's a game changer and it really does work exactly the way this paragraph is saying, because we've experienced it. And then, you know, when we're not in our right mind, we'll say to each other, well, you're not in your right mind, you're not in your higher self, blah blah blah, you know. And it's like, but when one of us are, it's just calm and peaceful, and it's like, oh yeah, I hear what you're saying. And it's just fascinating because, yeah. So I just wanted to give a practical, you know, real life experience. Like the course says, it's a practical course. Yeah, that's it. I'm sure David could testify to that.
I'm really humored by the initial statement you made about pretending to be in your right mind, which
Right, and it's
immediately I heard, well, that's a defense mechanism. It's a type of self-righteousness. Oh, wait a minute, I know what I'm talking about. I'm on the side of truth here. And the truth needs no defending. And so, to the degree that one is really eager to prove to another that I'm in my right mind, it needs no defense. It's an illustration that there's something to try to obscure or to hide. So that's very cute to pretend to be in your right mind. Noel?
For me, one of the keys is to forgive myself for several things. One, for being the big deal healer, for thinking I know better for the other person, for feeling and maybe observing that the other person isn't responding. That's my ego talking. So for me, it's like constant forgiveness and asking to be shown the right way, the right words, the right feelings, the right thoughts, the right motives.
Yeah, it really is constant, as Noel said. It's maintaining conscious contact with spirit guidance, particularly if one is in some kind of prolonged exchange with somebody that needs help and you know you're there just to be helpful. I find it's necessary I not get ahead of my skis and just start talking on my own, but rather, as Noel said, remain constantly in a state of awareness that I'm not here to talk for myself. I'm here to represent a form of healing that is for all. It doesn't come from me. Didn't we just read a moment ago about to recognize the true source of healing? And so whenever we're in those kind of exchanges, to keep in mind the true source of healing, maintaining constant contact. Okay, go on.
Just a quick comment on Susie's comments. I always want to reassure her that I am the one in my right mind and that I'll do anything I can to help induce her to find her right mindedness as well. And I'm saying this completely in jest because we're both always attempting to be in our right minds. And if there's somebody here who's always only in their right mind, please let me know because I like to see how that works and see what that feels like.
Well, I'd like to pretend to be in my right mind all the time.
Right, exactly. How do I know I'm pretending?
I'm really good. I'm glad you asked that because I'm going to use the word disarming, which is maybe not the perfect choice of symbols, but it's a feeling that I have nothing to protect here. There's no hostility, no attack, nor no defense. I'm neither exalting my position nor denigrating it. I'm just safe and comfortable with letting the truth be true. And it's a feeling for me of relaxation. It's not tension or mobilization to try to get ready for an encounter. It's just a letting go. And that's the way I experience it.
For me, it's just a total sense of like peace, calm, nothing. It's nothing really. It's just, if I have to even ask the question, then I'm not in my right mind. I feel like it just is, if you know what I mean.
So, is a state of mindlessness being in the right mind?
I would say a state of peace. My preference is to call it a state of
Yeah, I get that. I get that.
tranquility.
All right. The healer who relies on his own readiness is endangering his understanding. You are perfectly safe. It's
Do you
perfect,
realize how
that's unbelievable, isn't it? We always say the next paragraph will answer the questions. You are perfectly safe as long as you are completely unconcerned about your readiness, but maintain a consistent trust in mine. If your miracle working inclinations are not functioning properly, it is always because fear has intruded on your right mindedness and has turned it upside down. All forms of not right mindedness are the result of refusal to accept the atonement for yourself. If you do accept it, you are in a position to recognize that those who need healing are simply those who have not realized that right-mindedness is healing.
So the correction to pretending that we're in our right mind is to be unconcerned about one's self-centered state. But, and this is another way of referring to what Noel said, maintain a consistent trust in spirit, guidance, trust that spirit is ready. This is my prayer before all our classes because I never feel ready before a session. I know this habitually because it happens so often. I always feel unprepared. There's part of me that feels inadequate. So my little self is inadequate or unprepared. But I've recognized that that's a trick, and to be completely unconcerned about that, to dismiss that as being feeling as meaningful, and instead entirely to trust that spirit is ready. Go ahead, Kim.
Along the same lines of what you just said, is if I get overly focused on outcomes of the miracle work that I do, then I immediately go out of my right mind. In other words, the miracle is up to the Holy Spirit. How I deliver it is one thing, just like what you just said about how you show up and do these meetings. Same thing happens to me. But if I get focused on the outcomes, it's an immediate trick.
Yeah. Very good, Kim. Very good. And I've shared before to illustrate what Kim just said. I used to teach miracles in Stewart, which is about a 50-minute drive from where I was living. And after the meeting, I'd get in the car and drive home. And every time my mind would start to review and evaluate what happened in the meeting. And I'd be concerned it didn't go the way it could have or the way my mind. And what I noticed is this happened every time. And that I would also feel badly about a meeting that was just intended to help all of us become more free. And then I realized that the source of all those doubts, of all that concern and analysis, was from my lower self. It might have had something to do with driving at 70 miles an hour and trying to keep myself on the road safely and all. That's an excuse, sorry. So that I had to teach myself not to listen to that voice that would appear consistently. So, okay, so I want to go on here, make a few more comments. This is an idea that will come up throughout the remainder of A Course in Miracles. It's about having your right mind turned upside down. It's a metaphor here's the way I explain the metaphor. When your mind is right side up, your consciousness is reaching towards source. It's reaching higher to your holy mind, your holy self. That's your right side up. But when fear and doubt and questioning come in, it flips your orientation downward towards the body and fear and death and guilt and judgment, and your mind goes upside down. It's a directional change. So which we call not right-mindedness. This is, and what is that? It's trying to rely on your own illusions to guide you rather than to accept the atonement for yourself. And so this becomes a primary orientation of orienting yourself to your higher self rather than to the feelings and thoughts that are emerging from your lower self. And if you accept the higher self, the atonement, you're in a position to recognize that those who need healing are no different than you. It's simply that their mind is flipped in the wrong direction at that moment. That's the only, and that's the only thing that needs correction is to reorient one's awareness towards your highest holy self. Noel?
Following from what Kim said, one of the stumbling blocks for me is I want this outcome. Is anticipating and dictating almost the outcome that I want. And so, as you say, that to neutralize that is to just surrender to the atonement and to know that this brother is one with me and stop dictating to Holy Spirit.
Yes. Yes, very good. To be unconcerned about those self-appointed outcomes, which, by the way, just seems to be, I don't know, this is personal comment on the site. It seems to me that in the business world, my experience in a career in the business world, I worked for major corporations most of my life. We're always oriented towards getting the outcomes that the management had decided. We were all working towards the goal to make these products and be successful. It was an orientation of which all of this now calls all that into question and says that the only true source of holy goals is from the Holy Spirit. So before we go on, all forms of upside down thinking, of miscreation, are the result of being detached, refusing to accept the atonement for yourself, which leads us into the line that I'm going to ask you to memorize.
The sole responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement for himself. This means you recognize that mind is the only creative level and that its errors are healed by the atonement. Once you accept this, your mind can only heal. By denying your mind any destructive potential and reinstating its purely constructive powers, you place yourself in a position to undo the level confusion of others. The message you then give to them is the truth that their minds are similarly constructive and their miscreations cannot hurt them. By affirming this, you realize you release the mind from over-evaluating its own learning device and restore the mind to its true position as the learner.
Mm-hmm. So let's repeat this statement together 3 times. I think you'll find that ultimately this is valuable. The
sole responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement for himself.
The sole
responsibility of the miracle
worker is to accept the atonement for himself. The sole responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement for himself. I use that as a guiding post whenever I get confused. That's why I'm emphasizing it here. Now, this is not to make one self-centered, to accept the atonement for oneself, for once you accept the atonement for oneself, it means that your mind can only heal, and you place yourself in a position to help others heal. It means you can now be as a fully function. Your purpose for being here is to be a miracle worker. Your mind can then fully function for the purpose that Spirit has given it. And so I encourage you, and if this language is not as well suited for you as I found it for myself, then you'll find another phrasing of it that has the same meaning, to put the atonement for first. Of all the things you need to do, accepting the atonement is number 1, and then everything that follows from there can be used by the Holy Spirit, because you've invited the recognition and reestablishment of your connection to Source. David, you had your hand up.
Thank you so much, Jonica. I'm so clear about this. I just really appreciate your emphasis on it today. I have a meditation room at my house where I have a picture of my father and some other spiritual things that I go into and try to have a conversation with, listen to my lesson every day. And I've really become aware. I was sharing with someone today that I think we've talked about this before, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And I've really become aware of the necessity. And I said to somebody this morning, I'm going to put a sign at that threshold that before you can enter this miracle meditation room, you must accept the atonement before you enter. I have found I have to accept it for myself, and then by extending it to others, then it's reflected and it becomes that felt experience, and it's amplified. But I have to take it for myself, and you know, my paradigm is that I don't have enough, and I'm not one. That's why that mantra is so good for me, that I'm one, I have everything, and I have no needs. And that's only with God. So anyway, thank you. Yes, I have to feel the innocence for myself before I can extend it and have it reflected back to me. I'm very much an unhealed healer. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So let's pause a moment with this line. Once accepting the atonement, you place yourself in a position to undo the level of confusion of others. What's that look like? It means that you then realize that the truth is in the mind of the other person, and that their mind is intended to be creative, and that their illusions, their miscreations cannot hurt them. You're not confused about their true nature, and you affirm this. By affirming this, you release the mind from over evaluating its own learning device, which is the body. This is what level confusion does. It over evaluates the role of the body, placing so much emphasis on it that it attempts to build an entire life and identity around it. It's an over indexing on the importance of the body. When we say over indexing, it's placing too much value on something that is temporary at best. Your mind's going to be with you for a long time, but your body only not so long. And so level clarity helps release the mind from that error of over indexing on the learning device, the body, and restores the mind to its proper position. The mind is here to help you make the decisions necessary for you to heal yourself and to then be of help in healing others. Okay, we'll move on.
It should be emphasized again that the body does not learn any more than it creates. As a learning device, it merely follows the learner. But if it is falsely endowed with self-initiative, it becomes a serious obstruction to the very learning it should facilitate. Only the mind is capable of illumination. Spirit is already illuminated, and the body in itself is too dense. The mind, however, can bring its illumination to the body by recognizing that it is not the learner and is therefore unamenable to learning. The body is, however, easily brought into alignment with a mind that has learned to look beyond it toward the light.
Mm-hmm. So we're still on that theme from a moment ago of the mistake. This is a person needs healing of over stressing, overvaluing the body, falsely endowing the body with self-initiative means that this becomes an obstruction in awareness to the very learning that the body is intended to facilitate. The body is here, again, as a learning device so that initially we identify with it, and later we learn that that would mean that we are going to die. If we're identified with the body fully, that means you believe you are going to die. Because the day will come when the body will no longer live. And that would be a belief that there's nothing to you beyond the living cells of the body. So, truth is, and by the way, this expression, the body itself is too dense. A number of miracle teachers find that language to be really helpful. Spirit is illuminated. The mind is capable of being illuminated, but not the body. You can't illuminate the body. It's too dense. However, the mind is capable of being illuminated and can bring its illumination to the body by recognizing that the body's not the learner and is therefore unamenable to learning. However, that's not to say the body has no purpose while it lasts. It can be brought into alignment with the mind that has learned to look beyond the body towards the light, which is to say that you can use your voice, you can use your hands, you can use your eyes, your ears, your feet to carry a message to others who are only open to receiving a message from somebody else that's in a body form. And when you do that, the body becomes holy because you use it for a holy purpose. We'll go on.
Corrective learning always begins with the awakening of spirit and the turning away from the belief in physical sight. This often entails fear because you are afraid of what your spiritual sight will show you. I said before that the Holy Spirit cannot see error and is capable only of looking beyond it to the defense of atonement. There is no doubt that this may produce discomfort, yet the discomfort is not the final outcome of the perception. When the Holy Spirit is permitted to look upon the defilement of the altar, he also looks immediately toward the atonement. Nothing he perceives can induce fear. Everything that results from spiritual awareness is merely channelized toward correction. Discomfort is aroused only to bring the need for correction into awareness.
Mm-hmm. So let's give a little context to what it's talking about there. We're talking about you and I, personal experience, when we are still identified with our ego and we approach the altar to the Creator. It's a willingness to encounter the presence of spirit while still largely believing oneself to be a little ego. This often entails fear because the ego is inherently fearful, and also because the ego is afraid of God. And because you will become afraid of what you will find, what you will see when you approach the altar to the Creator. So this is like an early on beginner type step. Now, in truth, there's nothing to be afraid of. But as we said, the ego is naturally afraid. So, of course, it will react. So as you approach the altar to the Creator, the Holy Spirit is present. And she does not look at you as this little confused, upside down, guilty, fearful self. She cannot see error and is capable only of looking upon you in terms of the atonement, seeing your highest self, your true self, your holy self. So, having said that, doesn't mean that you are free of doubts and fear or discomfort. And so what we are invited to do is to adopt the Holy Spirit's perception as our own. Let me clarify. Rather than approaching the altar from our own guilt and sense of inadequacy and fear, we're invited to let go of those attitudes, those viewpoints, and exchange them for the viewpoint that we trust the Holy Spirit has. Holy Spirit is permitted. We didn't talk about defilement of the altar. So an altar is a set of devotions, and whatever you have been devoted to in your life will be what you place at your altar. And so many of us have placed illusions of this world uh, upon our altar. These are considered to be defilements of the altar. We've placed our own idols there, our own pseudo gods. But the when the Holy Spirit's permitted to look upon them, she does not judge against them. She immediately turns towards the eternal truth of the reality of union, your perfect union with the Creator. Nothing the Holy Spirit perceives will induce fear. Instead, what it merely channelizes towards correction. And if you're uncomfortable with this encounter with the holiness within you, that discomfort is done for a purpose, only to bring the need for correction into your awareness so that you don't hold on to the fears, the ego identity, so that you pay attention to how that feels and be willing to recognize the problem so it can be solved, and to hand it over to the Holy Spirit and say, this no longer is a part of who I am. I let go. Heather?
When you're reading that, when David was reading, I was really struck by the word when the Holy Spirit is permitted. I was like, well, who gives her permission? And then I realized, I have to give her permission. Like, if the permission comes from me, I have to not be ashamed to show her what I might be hiding or what my ego might be hiding. So I have to be willing to expose it and let her heal it.
Yeah, thank you, Heather, for pointing that out. That's a subtle catch there. It's also, you're permitting yourself to use the eyes of the Holy Spirit as your own. You're allowing yourself to let go of ego attitudes, self-judgments, self-deceptions, and permitting yourself to become a shared mind with the Holy Spirit. And that is our goal at all times, is to become a shared mind. I step back and let him lead the way, is lesson 149, I think. Susan?
I think the most important thing Heather just said is, like, for me, like, the Holy Spirit already knows what's in my mind. The Holy Spirit already knows what's going on. It's me, like Heather said, I have to be honest with myself and then really be able to give that. And I have to understand, oh, this is my ego. These are my ego thoughts. I can't help it. This is the way I've thought. This is the way I was taught. I'm being taught a different way, and I love what Heather just said, because I think that's just the key. I have to give the Holy Spirit permission, and she really does do the rest.
She really does. I need to pick up the pace a little bit.
The fear of healing arises in the end from an unwillingness to accept unequivocally that healing is necessary. What the physical eye sees is not corrective, nor can error be corrected by any device that can be seen physically. As long as you believe in what your physical sight tells you, your attempts at correction will be misdirected. The real vision is obscured because you cannot endure to see your own defiled altar. But since the altar has been defiled, your state becomes doubly dangerous unless it is perceived.
So I think the one of the best guidance to our lower mind around all the fears that we might have regarding moving on this spiritual path is just this. The fear of healing along this path arises because we're unwilling to accept the fact that healing is necessary. And so once we surrender that illusion that I don't need to heal and agree, oh boy, I need to heal, that removes the faith from the fear of healing, and we begin to embrace healing openly. Let's go on.
Healing is an ability that developed after the separation, before which it was unnecessary. Like all aspects of the belief in space and time, it is temporary. However, as long as time persists, healing is needed as a means of protection. This is because healing rests on charity, and charity is a way of perceiving the perfection of another, even if you cannot perceive it in yourself. Most of the loftier concepts of which you are capable now are time dependent. Charity is really a weaker reflection of a much more powerful love encompassment that is far beyond any form of charity you can conceive of as yet. Charity is essential to right-mindedness in the limited sense in which it can now be attained.
So I'd like to add to your vocabulary the term charity. We mean it in the sense of spiritual charity, not in the Orthodox dictionary version of it. We mean it in the sense that it's here. Charity is a way that you perceive others through the recognition of the perfection of them, even if you cannot perceive perfection in yourself. It's a way of affirming the truth is true, regardless of what the mind's eyes might see or the behaviors might appear. And healing, being a miracle worker, functioning as a healer, can only occur when we practice charity. Healing rests on charity. Remember, healing is an ability you cultivate, you learn to cultivate the ability to heal. And the basis for that is charity. It rests on charity, which has to do with the way you perceive others, perceiving the perfection of another, regardless of how you might perceive yourself. Charity is a part of being in your right mind, of orienting your mind to your higher self, your holy self. You have to choose to be charitable. It's a higher choice. It's a better choice. So I'm going to give an assignment to you. On the East Coast, it's right now a little after noon. You've got the rest of the day. Practice looking with upon others that you encounter today. Look upon them charitably. Look upon the perfection of their holy self in that moment. This is the state in which is necessary for healing to occur, essential to the right-minded attitude. So this is an ability to remember, to look upon things not the way your little self of the past would have regarded people that you encounter, but to be in your right mind and look for the perfection in another.
Charity is a way of looking at another as if he had already gone far beyond his actual accomplishments in time. Since his own thinking is faulty, he cannot see the atonement for himself, or he would have no need of charity. The charity that is accorded him is both an acknowledgement that he needs help and a recognition that he will accept it. Both of these perceptions clearly imply their dependence on time, making it apparent that charity still lies within the limitations of this world. I said before that only revelation transcends time. The miracle, as an expression of charity, can only shorten it. It must be understood, however, that whenever you offer a miracle to another, you are shortening the suffering of both of you. This corrects retroactively as well as progressively.
So an example just came to my mind. I hope this is helpful, but I think that we tend to look on young children more charitably, that we're less resistant to look upon them. So if a 4-year-old consistently fails to be able to tie his shoestrings properly, lacks the ability to tie his or her own shoestrings, it's not that you then come to the conclusion that they're stupid, that they're hopeless, and can never be of anything in life. You look upon them charitably, knowing that they'll acquire this ability and skill given enough time. And you believe in them. You have confidence in their ability to learn and grow. Well, charity, now switching now to the way we might look at other adults, where generally the ego is less permissive than with children. Charity is a way of looking at another as if he had already gone far beyond his actual accomplishments in time. This is about a time collapse. It's using spiritual vision to look at a person. Again, right-mindedness looks to your higher mind, your holy mind, and then looks upon others charitably, not as they are perhaps stuck in their current situation where, as it says here, they can't see the atonement for themselves, or they wouldn't need charity. It becomes not a judge of where they are stuck in time, but it becomes a believer in their ability to heal, far beyond the actual accomplishments currently in time. We need spirit's help for this. This is not something you can just intellectually manipulate yourself into. This is what we call vision. This is faith. This is confidence in spirit. I'm very moved by the whole injunction to look upon others charitably. I find it has helped me a great deal of times when I was inclined to see people for what they appear to be right in this moment, which seems to be stuck, inadequate. And then I remember a charitable way is to look beyond that. So the miracle is a way of shifting from stuck perception into charitable perception. And that helps to shorten the healing time. It shortens the suffering of both of you, by the way. It shortens your own healing time because you are now practicing charitable, holy perception. That would be enough of a reason to want to practice charity. But there's one final statement here, which is very powerful. And that is, when looking upon another charitably, it shortens the time for healing. It shortens the suffering of both of you. And through a process that the Holy Spirit is in charge of, that shortening corrects the errors of the past as well as those that would otherwise have occurred in the future. Or in other words, to use the statement that we said before, when in the ego state, we remain stuck in time, repeating the same errors over and over. Situations arise where we could change our mind, but the ego keeps us stuck and we haven't moved forward because we keep repeating the errors. The miracle helps us to live in the present and take a step forward, freeing ourselves from the errors of the past. Well, a miracle corrects the errors of the past as well as those that otherwise would have been repeated again and again in the future. And this is how the miracle shortens the amount of time it takes to heal. So that's a lot to take in. I suggest that you review charity again on your own. So quick review of some of the themes that we talked about today. We talked about the release from fear, and it's essential the miracle worker fully understand the fear of being released from illusions. The ego is surely going to become defensive here. The fear of healing arises in the end from an unwillingness to accept the fact that healing is necessary, which results in obscuring real vision, because we can't endure to look at our own idols sitting on the altar to the Creator. But since we have placed our own idols on the altar, the state becomes doubly dangerous until we recognize it. Let me recognize the error, the problem, so it can be solved. And so the miracle worker can be of help here if he's in his right mind, however briefly, to help establish right-mindedness in someone else. Any form of not right-mindedness is an orientation. It's towards lower level mind. It's an identification with the body and its fears and its judgments. Therefore, your sole responsibility is to accept the atonement for yourself. And in doing that, remember that charity is a way of looking at another as if they've already gone beyond their accomplishments in time, a way of perceiving the perfection of another, even if you can't not perceive that perfection in yourself. The miracle becomes an expression of charity. And so that's as far as we're going to go today. Let me invite you to our next session, which is really a continuation of this section today. It goes over a set of special principles. And my experience of them is that these are often overlooked or misunderstood by people. It's in chapter 2, no less. You'd think it would be important by being placed up front there, but people miss it or misunderstand it and go on with a misunderstanding in their mind, such that then the things that we encounter later on are not clear because we didn't understand these special principles. We'll cover that in our next session. And if you are not available during the live session, hopefully you can find time to catch it on the recording. So thank you, David, for reading today. Thank you all for your attention. Remember, your assignment is to practice charitably perceiving others, and know that as you do so, it heals both them as well as yourself.
It's a perfect example of to have all, give all to all.
It really is. It really is. It's the law of the creation.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Namaste.
Thank you.
Namaste.
John.
Namaste. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Mhm.